Greetings, YouTube. Today I'm going to review the latest book I have read, The Art of Deception in Warfare by Colonel Michael Dewar. Colonel Dewar is a member, or at least was at the time of the writing, a member of the Royal Military Forces for the UK. Now this book primarily covers deception as it was used between World War I and 1989 when the book was published. He does touch on some of the earlier eras, going all the way back to the biblical times, and in particular he has a very interesting idea about the walls of Jericho. Now the tradition is that the walls of Jericho were blown down with a horn. Not all that plausible, but one of the things that the Jewish forces did at Jericho is they marched around the city for like a week, playing horns and making a big ruckus. And what Colonel Dewar thinks actually occurred is that after 5 or 6 days of this, that the residents in the city got blasé about it. Oh, it's just the crazy Jews. And they let their guard down. Literally. In the sense that, say you had a couple of guards that decide, okay, these guys are coming by again. They've been doing this for a week. Let's just go get something to eat. And so they walked away from their post. And the Jewish forces, waiting for this to happen, took the opportunity to slap their ladders against the wall, pour themselves over as fast as they possibly could, and by the time the defenders of the city realized that was going on, they already made a bridgehead, and they were in the city, and very shortly it fell to them. And of course, over time, the legend got blown out of proportion, and the walls fell because of a horn, when in actuality, the walls fell because they wore down the patience of their opponents. But as I said, most of the book does cover from World War I up through 1989, and it does have a distinctly British slant to it, because that's his field of expertise. He is a British officer. He served in Ireland. And he knows the history of his own forces and his own nation the best of any. Though he does have a very solid working knowledge of all the NATO forces available at the time of the writing. And because of the era this book was written in, the Soviets play a really big part. He discusses a great deal about how the NATO are planning, how NATO is planning or lacking to plan to handle the deception that could be pulled off by the Soviets, or how NATO is planning to try to deceive the Soviets in different ways. And a lot of these things in here weren't really shocking. Some of the depth that they'll go through and the multiple layers of deception were quite interesting. How a deception campaign can have, 5 or 6 different avenues of deception going on at the same time, helping to reinforce each other. And he talks about quite a bit about some of the major deception plans that were in World War II, which is the biggest military conflict that the world has ever seen. And so the deception that succeeded during that war were major successes most of the time, and they have been written, very frequently in history books. And he shows a different angle to a lot of them, which I found very entertaining. And he did still introduce some concepts that I really wasn't aware of. For example, smoke has been used by every military force in history as a form of deception and camouflage. But he talked about the fact that it really was a major prevalent form of camouflage all the way up to the present. And I never really thought about smoke as being a modern era, something used within my lifetime, but it has been. He also talks about foam. Now, I had never considered foam as a form of camouflage. But if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. You can have a truck loaded with the foam generating device on the back of it. And if you have the foam dyed to match the ground around you, you can drive this truck down a road and instantaneously, from the air at least, make that road disappear. When a plane's going by at 500 knots, and it's trying to line up their sights on something, if the roads that they're trying to lock onto for targeting are suddenly gone, that means that your defense target, the target you're probably trying to protect, may make it through the day. I thought that was quite clever. So overall, if you have any kind of interest whatsoever in military history in the psychological aspects of the military. And yes, that's an ear here. That's Mandarin. She's sitting on my hand. If you have an interest in these things, I definitely recommend that you read this book. And if you are a role player, this isn't a particularly big book. It's not a huge book. And I think it would have a lot of useful information if you're ever plan on running any kind of conventional military campaign, either in the past, the present, or the future, because a lot of the doctrines in this are going to be applicable for the 200 years in the past and probably the next 200 years. So you'd be able to pick up enough information into this to really put forward a realistic feel to a campaign, if you're the GM and you're setting up the defenses, or if you're role-playing in that said campaign, either defending your particular position or attempting to outsmart your enemy. So definitely, I recommend this book. This is a book that's definitely staying in my collection. The illustrations are good. His information is wonderful. I really quite enjoyed myself. I hear that he's written a number of other books, and I may hunt down the other things that he's written because, unlike many military writers, he remembers that he's talking to people.